All right, Matt, we are back at it. It's been through the winter, but last year we went all the way from Wolf Road down to Mokena Street, and then the next one was Mokena Street down to Front and Division here.
Yeah, that's right.
And now we're back in summer weather here in late March.
Yeah, it's awesome.
To continue down our walk. So
yeah.
why don't we start these properties behind us? We talked a little bit. You told us in the last episode about the story how Yunker Farm. There was a fire at Yunker Farm.
Yeah.
And the young boy or somebody living there sitting on the porch called that fire in.
Yeah, it was Herb Hohenstein. Yeah.
So anything more about this house that you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, honestly, I don't all remember what I said the last time, but it bears repeating in any case. It's a very, very old house. Goes back to the 19th century. It has, as many of the properties in Mokena have that are this age, getting at its exact age, finding out when it was built, has defied all research attempts. In fact, this may not even be the first building on this property.
Really?
There's a little bit of evidence that shows that there may even have been something else here before this house was built. But in any case, this home was built. If I had to place a guess, or if I had to, based on some property records I was able to dig out at the county, I would say it was maybe built in the 1870s.
Oh, wow.
Possibly. But in any case, it's tremendously old. It goes far back into the 19th century. Owners going way, way back were the Enders family, the family of Michael Enders. And if anybody's familiar with the history of St. Mary's Church, they'll remember that name. The Enderses were or a relative of Michael's, excuse me, was Matthias Enders, who basically founded the parish, gave the land for the church, et cetera, et cetera. And Mr. Enders, Michael Enders, and his wife are buried in the historic part of the cemetery. Excuse me again. And his family sold off this property to a gentleman by the name of Simon Hohenstein about 1905. Okay. And any of our viewers or fans who are longtime Mokenians will know that name. There were always lots of Hohensteins around. And Simon Hohenstein was a very influential guy in town. He was never mayor, but he held various offices around town. I believe at one point he was Frankfort Township supervisor. I know he was postmaster for a long time. When he moved into this property, he had just retired from keeping a saloon that was on the opposite corner here.
Oh, really? Okay.
He was running that place for that watering hole for about 10 years or so at that point.
Can you talk, so there's kind of a string here, and we look at it, 3 houses that appear to be they're all kind of smaller homes. Are they any relation or?
Yeah, not that I know of, but these 3 houses are all very historic. They're very, very old, go way back into the 19th century. This red house here was actually constructed around a log cabin.
Oh, wow.
At one point.
So there's still the remains of that log cabin in that house there?
Apparently,
structure. Wow.
Apparently so, yeah. And that was in the hands of the Beckstein family for a long time.
Did they live? Was that the Beckstein's house?
Yes, that was
Christian Beckstein, another one?
Not Christian Beckstein. This house was owned by I'm not sure if it was him or his wife. If it was Robert Beckstein, because he grew up here but moved to Chicago. I can't remember if it was him or his wife that owned this property, but it had been in his family for a really long time. There was a family, and this is, you guys know how I am when I tell history. I like to tell good stories. I necessarily don't like to focus on sad stories.
Sure.
But this one's kind of interesting. These Becksteins, I think it was Mr. Robert Beckstein's grandfather, they were the Hinrichsons. And of course, I'm totally blanking on Mr. Hinrichson's first name, but he was a really interesting guy. Of course, now we're talking way back into the 19th century. He had been a sea captain at one time.
Oh, wow.
And he had been a farmer way up in the kind of extreme northeast portion of Frankfort Township. But at one point, he retired and moved off the farm, and he and his wife settled into what, by all appearances, was the red house right here. And they died in a very unique way in this property in the 1890s. They both asphyxiated when there was a problem with their coal-burning stove.
Oh my goodness.
In the middle of the night. There was a blockage in the standpipe or the chimney or something, and these poisonous fumes seeped out into the house, and they basically suffocated to death.
Wow.
And it's actually not the only time that happened in the history of Mokena either.
Wow.
And as far as I can tell, the property stayed in the family's hands until the Becksteins owned it. And there are people around still who remember when Mrs. Beckstein lived there.
Yeah. It's a really neat little strip. And even, beyond First here, it's a real historic, and you have the old St. John's,
Yep.
that was turned into that property. So this corner really holds the history of Mokena well, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, with this White House here, that's another, the White House down there and the Red House, they're probably about the same age. Easily, if you ask me, could go before the Civil War.
Wow.
Even. But a little bit of history that comes from a nice older lady by the name of Eloise Erdman. She's passed away now, unfortunately, but she was a longtime Mokena resident. A lot of people will remember her, and she grew up in town World War I years into the 1920s, and she always said that the White House was actually two separate houses that had been put together.
Really?
Yeah.
Two really small houses?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Once again, also not the only time that happened in Mokena's
Sure.
history, but
yeah. And they,
Yeah.
that red house is really tucked in there. I mean, they really were short on space or looking to fill every space, weren't they?
oh yeah, that's the thing about our forefathers is that they didn't waste anything, especially not space either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep making our way. 'Cause
Yeah.
The next building down, the brick one here, that has a lot of history in it as well,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely. And there's a good story with that one too. Whenever people talk to me about what nowadays we call the ESDA building, I always like to tell this story, but I'll work it in there as we talk about the history of it.
Yeah, so
Yeah, that's the
where did this come from? What was the start of this building?
So this building was built back in 1916, so it's a little over 100 years old now. And basically what we have here is Mokena's very first village hall, very first municipal building, because it wasn't just the village hall when it was built, it also housed the village's firefighting equipment, and there also were jail cells in it too, which, believe it or not, they all fit into this small little building here. The mayor and the village board would meet there, so on and so forth. And the facade that's on this building nowadays is not the original facade. At some point in the later part of the 20th century, they kind of re-bricked the front part of it, because where the sign is that says Mokena Emergency Services, there used to be a big kind of like a door there where the fire engine would pull in and out.
Oh, really?
The old one that the fire department still has that you see like
Yeah.
on the 4th of July, yeah.
Did you ever know it when it was like that, or has it always been like this?
In my lifetime, it's always been like
Okay.
this. The village, or I should say, the village hall moved out in 1976 when they purchased what had been the elementary school, where the village hall is nowadays.
And where were they meeting before 1916?
Pretty much all over the place. There were, basically, it all depended who was mayor, who had a connection on the village board. Like, for example, when the village was first incorporated in 1880 under Mayor Isaias McGovney, one of the trustees was a guy by the name of Valentine Scher, and he was a harness maker. And he let the village, or I should say the village board meetings, come together and meet in his shop, which is Gino Petrola's place a little further up Front Street nowadays. There was a time not too terribly long after that where they were meeting in the basement of Charles Sheik's saloon, which was Little Al's nowadays. they met all over. Later on, like I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the last places they met before the village hall was built was in the waiting room of the Rock Island Depot.
Huh.
They met there. They met at the old Mokena Hall, which is where Avalanche Jewelry is now.
Okay.
That was just like a multi-use space. Various events and dances and bazaars and things were held there, and the village board would meet there. But they finally got their own, the first ever municipal building in the history of Mokena is what nowadays we call the ESDA building.
And do you know of any other building that was here before this property?
That's a very good question. There was, way before this building was built, there was another building there that housed a furniture shop. It was ran by a gentleman by the name of Mokena, who was a German guy. What the heck was his first name? If you want to know, contact me and I'll look up his first name again for you. But that building burnt down in the early 1880s, around 1881, 1882. And it was actually pretty crazy because Mr. Mokena was asleep in the building when it caught on fire, and pieces of his ceiling started falling in on him on his bed as it was burning down.
Wow.
So he got out by the skin of his teeth. But not too long after that fire and that building got lost, he sold the property, that lot, to the village. And then the village moved the calaboose up here, which is the jail, the little wooden shack that used to be our jail. There was a little kind of an outbuilding they built where they housed the firefighting equipment that they had back then. And of course, as we know, a lot of people will remember the village's first water tower was built there in 1898. So the village was using the property for all kinds of different stuff up until the time they built this building.
Well, let's go over and take a closer look.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about the property that's behind us here.
Yeah, definitely.
So you can definitely see the difference in the old brick and the new brick.
Oh yeah.
I love old doors, and this door on the side here, I thought is so cool.
Yeah, it is.
Just a neat old door. But,
yeah. I wonder if it still opens.
Have you ever been in here?
You know, believe it or not, in my entire life living in Mokena, I've never been in this building.
Really?
Unfortunately. I've never been in this building. Would love to. Maybe someday I'll get the chance, but there used to be a little Mokena museum that was in this building.
Oh, really?
Back in the 1980s under the original Mokena Historical Society when Mayor Quinn was running it. This is where they had their little museum.
And then, so the calaboose actually sat on this property?
Yes. It sat on this property from, around 1881 or 2 until they sold it to Dick McGovney in 1916.
Okay.
And I believe one of these little things sticking out of the ground is the last piece of the water tower. I've been told.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and this tower came down in the storms this past July.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, this was here.
Up until then, yeah.
I never realized that. That was a bad storm.
Yeah.
I think 100 years from now, we're still going to be talking about that storm.
So across the street here are two much newer buildings.
Yeah, yeah.
What can you tell us about this site?
Well, this like every square inch of Front Street has some history attached to it. Excuse me. So where this building over here where the drugstore is, there used to be a pretty simple wooden building that sat there that Mr. Hohenstein built, who lived on the corner. About 1905, he built that building kind of like as storage for his farm implements and his buggies and all that kind of stuff, because he was a dealer in those things. After he got out of the saloon business, sleighs for winter, stuff like that. And then much later on, that building, I'm pretty sure it was that building. If I'm mistaken, somebody will correct me, but was converted into a house. And among other people, a gentleman by the name of Tuffy Hummerding lived there, who a lot of people might remember.
Great name.
Yeah, he was kind of a local character. He was famous for kind of begrudgingly shoveling all the sidewalks on Front Street after it snowed. But
And letting everybody know he was upset about it at the same time?
Yeah. Always saying, this next year they can get somebody else to do it.
That's funny.
He even made it into the paper once with that. But and then, if I'm not mistaken, pinning down where the exact location of this building was has been kind of tough because there's no pictures of it that have survived. But it appears that in the 19th century, there was another building roughly here where the eye office is that was a blacksmith shop. Of course, this is going way, way back into the 19th century. The blacksmith was a gentleman by the name of Bob Turner. And he, kind of interesting, he was one of the few non-German people around here back then. But Mr. Turner was a blacksmith, and his specialty was diseased hooves and stuff like that. That's kind of like what he was known for. And he had a helper by the name of Jack O'Neill who worked with him. And that's where their shop was. Mr. Turner lived up on First Street. But yeah, unfortunately, I've never seen any photos of that shop. Hopefully, maybe someday one will surface, but.
And you know about, was there anything between those properties and what we see today? Because these are obviously very new.
Oh yeah, these buildings went up, if I had to guesstimate, I'd say probably around 2007, 2008, if I remember right.
Okay.
Before that, this was just an empty lot. My whole life growing up just down the street, yeah, this was just empty grass right here, and you could always kind of see the little indentation in the ground where that building stood.
Okay.
That was there, because that building stood for quite a long time. Even in the 1980s, it was still there. But yeah, you know,
Yeah.
it's
And then kind of behind us here, right? Is this in the general area where the water tower would have stood?
Yep, the water tower stood directly behind the village hall, or the ESDA building.
Oh, so in like kind of in the fenced area.
Yeah, oh,
there.
absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
within the fenced-in area right here. At one time, all the municipal stuff in Mokena was all right here on this one lot, so.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And I think you shared the story real quick. Didn't the guy that took it was like one guy took the whole water tower down by himself? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. They did not have to have a huge demolition crew do it, which you'd think they would, because it was this very tall iron structure. It was just one single guy. This is about 1984, 1985, right before me. I just missed it. Who came up and climbed up to the top of the water tower with like a acetylene torch or something, and just kind of cut it apart bit by bit.
Wow.
And I have heard that the ESDA building suffered a little bit of damage when that happened, because he'd be way up there and these molten red hot blobs of iron would be falling down, and I guess some of them landed on the roof and burnt it up a little bit. Nothing major, but still.
Not a lot of precautions. I mean, I saw some pictures, and that guy looked like he was hanging out by himself.
Yeah, it was a one-man, 100% a one-man job. It was very impressive.
So, we swap here a little bit. And then talk about this property over here. I know at one point it was a butcher shop, right?
Yep, absolutely, yeah. Once again, very, very old, very, very historic property. You probably notice every time I see something old, I call it historic and significant, but I think it is. And the story, the fabric that makes up Mokena. This building here, once again, we have another one of these buildings in town that I really think probably predates the Civil War. One of the oldest that's still left, and of course, I'm sure it's been added onto over the years, like especially this wing here that comes off to the east, that was probably built on.
And this part on the right here, you think probably comes off to the right here, is that an addition as well?
Oh, probably, yeah.
And then was Well, what about the garage? Was that, maybe talk about that as well. Was that all part of this one property?
It is nowadays. I don't think the garage is necessarily too historic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been there as far back as I can remember, but I don't think it's too terribly historic. But I guess the big claim to fame of, and you know, I could give you the whole history going back to day one, but you know, one business that a lot of people will remember, especially our oldest Mokenians, was Mr. Mueller, Martin Mueller's butcher shop,
Okay.
which he ran here. Very, very old-fashioned place, stamped tin ceiling, sawdust on the floor. And he opened up here in the 1920s.
Wow.
Very interesting guy. He was born in Germany. He was a veteran of the German army right before World War I. So he lucked out. He missed World War I, but later came to America, settled in Joliet first, and then he brought his whole family to Mokena. Yeah, right about maybe a tad over 100 years ago. And he stayed in business for quite a long time until World War II actually forced him out of business because meat, like just about everything else, was being rationed, and he just couldn't get the meat in his store that he needed to keep his business afloat. So,
Was that the last time it was a business?
not the last time it was a business. Not too terribly long after the Muellers, those first few years after World War II, business moved in by the name of Munch Supply, which sold electronics, electrical knickknacks like for electricians, appliances, stuff like that. And fun fact, that business actually still exists
Really?
to this day. I forget where they're based out of nowadays, but it's somewhere here in Chicagoland. And every once in a while, if you're driving around this area, you'll bump into one of their trucks.
Huh.
Munch Supply, yeah.
Interesting.
I think that's still what they're called. But so yeah, they had their business here, and Mr. Munch was involved in local affairs, local politics a little bit, stuff like that. But yeah,
But then
really,
pretty much been a residence for quite a while now.
yeah, it was at some point, yeah, it was converted into residential space. I'm trying to think of when that would have been. I remember talking to somebody once that lived there in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
So it's been residential for quite a while
Sure.
now, yeah.
What about these properties here behind us?
Yep.
Anything?
Oh yeah, there used to be 2 houses here.
Okay.
Just to give you the quick version, the one that was over here was a 19th century house. Very modest, not pretentious, just a simple house that you'd see in a Midwestern town for the 1800s, later part of the 1800s. Gentleman who lived there was a guy by the name of Nicholas Junker, who was, of course, a family member of the Junker family as we know them. And he was born in Switzerland, and he kind of fit the Swiss stereotype because he was a watchmaker.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
In town here?
In town here, yep. He made and repaired watches. So that was Mr. Junker's property. And that house stood for a pretty long time. In the 1970s, it was still there. I'm not sure when it came down. Sometime between the 70s and about 1990, because I never remember it being here. But it'll stand here. This lot right here, where this house is nowadays, going, once again, way back into the 19th century, there was a business on this site. I couldn't tell you what the building looked like, how big it was, but around, let's see, I believe it was roughly around, and I could double check this. If somebody out there really wants to know, let us know, and I'll get the exact date for you. But I want to say it was around 1916 or thereabouts. That building that was here was moved to a farm outside town. And then whatever happened to it, we don't know. But then a gentleman from the Lease family built a house here that then burnt down in the 1980s.
Okay.
Of course, the Leases were another one of those families that was very involved with local politics and business for many years. But so yeah, basically this expanse right here, we had 2 houses, and then going way back a business commercial building of some sort.
Funny, it sits back probably further than any other house on Front Street.
It does, yeah, which is weird to me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the
And
reason
it's an
for that
odd
is.
building. Like it doesn't, yeah. It kind of must have fallen in that time frame where they weren't really paying too much attention to what was being built.
Yeah.
You know, just an odd building. So how about this one here?
So this one here is another old one, another really historic one, and kind of like we were saying with the Mueller Butcher Shop across the street and Simon Hohenstein's house. It's kind of hard to pin down when exactly this building was built, but due to pictures I've seen, we know it was here in the 19th century. Something was here in as far back as 1862, which is the Civil War, but if it was this building or not, hard to say. We don't know. But the earliest history on this building goes back to about the 1880s when it was owned by the Sipple family. Christian Sipple was the patriarch of that family, and he ran a general store here for quite some time. And then his wife, Mrs. Sipple, was a hat maker. She was in the millinery business. And then after Mr. Sipple died, which appears to have been in the 1890s at some point, I've never been able to track down when exactly that was. I know that as of 1892, 93, he was still alive, but in the 1900 census, Mrs. Sipple is listed as a widow. So at some point, but seems like she kept up the business here, and then later she moved it right around 1910, 1911, Mrs. Sipple moved further down the street to, once again to where Gino's office is now, and that was the Sipple store for many, many years. A lot of people remember that. But the building stayed in the hands of that family for quite some time. It was converted over into residential space not too terribly long after the store moved out. And there are still people alive today who lived there. One person must have lived here around in the 1960s or so, said that Christian Sipple was her landlord. That was the original Mr. and Mrs. Sipple's son. So it stayed in the hands of the family for a very long time. And the building looks pretty different nowadays than it did years ago. The main front door would have been right here in front with the big windows in front so passersby could see what was going on in the store. Also to let light into the store in the days before electricity. So
you can definitely see how it could have been a store back in the day. Yeah.
Oh yeah, very historic building. It had some changes over the years, but luckily it's still with us. So.
And next to it here is a multi-unit building. Not very historic, right?
No, not too terribly historic.
But anything before that?
Oh yeah, this is where the Kropp homestead was.
Okay.
Martin Kropp, who was a butcher in town and later like a hog shipper over the railroad, built at least part of that house as far back as the 1850s.
Wow.
And it stayed in his family for well over 100 years. He raised his family there. Later, his son, Emil, after his father passed away in the 1890s, kind of took over things, and he lived there. He was born in 1870 in the house there, and he died a couple years after World War II ended, around 1947, 48, and had lived in the homestead there his whole life.
Wow.
They raised a family of 3 boys there. And an interesting, fun little story about that is that in the front yard of the Kropp house, there was this big boulder that Mr. Kropp, Emil Kropp, called a meteorite. And whether or not this is true, if this thing really did come from space, we don't know. But I believe it came from their farm, which was a little north of town on Wolf Road. And then they had it in the front yard for a while. And when the house was unfortunately torn down in the 1960s, the so-called meteorite was just sort of pushed into the hole and buried over, so it might still be there.
Really?
Who knows? Yeah.
Go dig it up.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. That's
Wow,
kind of a fun story.
We're gonna cross over, or we're gonna go down a little bit, but let's talk about another multi-unit property here that I'm guessing has a little more history to it than stands today. So what's this property?
This one right here?
Yep.
Yep. This, I don't really know too much about this. This was just an apartment building. I believe it was built in the 1970s.
Any significance to the lot? Any other businesses or anything over the years?
There was a 19th century era home that stood here.
Oh, okay.
At one point. If I'm not mistaken, was that? Pretty sure that was here. I believe a gentleman by the name of Abram Evans lived in that house that was here towards the end of the 19th century, and he was a Civil War veteran.
Okay.
And when he passed away around 1896 or thereabouts, he was buried in Denny Cemetery, which we know now today as Pioneer Cemetery. So he's our Civil War veteran we have up there. Yeah, I believe this was where his house was.
Okay. Talk about these next couple houses here. Maybe we start,
sure.
With this one, and again, a very historic corner, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The old police station here.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Lots of historic structures here.
So tell us about this house.
So this house right here is one of the oldest in town, actually. It was definitely already there in 1862, but it's probably a few years older than that. The gentleman, of course, who we all know, Esaias McGovney, once said that his brother-in-law, a gentleman by the name of Warren Knapp, built this house. And he lived in Mokena in the 1850s. By the time 1860 rolled around, he was already back out of state. And he's kind of significant because he was Mokena's first postmaster and first business owner, although his business was further down Front Street this way. In any case, Esaias McGovney said this. I'm sure it's true, but I've never been able to come up with the paper trail to give like an exact date to it. But the house was sold towards the end of the 1860s to a German gentleman. Actually, his wife is whose name the property was in, but by the name of George Werner. And he kept a saloon and an inn. And it's very possible that that was right here.
Wow.
Because we do know, once again, that this property looked very different years ago. We know that the front door, the original front door, was where the bay window is nowadays. And I really believe that that this was some sort of business. Lester Sheik, who we know as our milkman, he was born in 1899, and he said he had remembered hearing that a saloon was here at one point. He's probably thinking of Mr. Werner's place.
Okay.
But anyway, it was in his family for a very, very long time. Somewhere around the early 1900s or thereabouts, the property came into the Scheiblich family, Andrew Scheiblich, Andrew and Nettie Scheiblich.
Okay.
And I don't know, it's kind of blurred. It's hard to tell if they actually lived here or not, or just rented the place, because they owned another house on First Street closer to Wolf Road. But tons of people have lived in this house over the years. In fact, I believe I'm pretty sure the Needham family lived here for a period when they first came to town in the 1930s. And they have kind of a tragic claim to fame because their son, Burl, was one of Mokena's guys in World War II that was killed.
Oh, wow.
So he would have lived in this house.
Was there ever anything on this lot, or was it next to it, or was that always part of the property as far as you know? As far as
I've ever been able to tell, yeah, where the yard is here was just part of the Scheiblich property / Werner property. It's kind of a miracle that it's still there, because as far back as the early 1900s, around 1910 or thereabouts, people considered this house to be one of the worst looking ones in town.
Really?
Based on the condition it was in.
Wow.
But I think it kind of looks like that when the Scheiblichs not inherited, but bought the property, that they really fixed it up and spruced it up. So.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
And another cool little piece of history is that now our friend Jen lives there, who's responsible for getting the Yunker Farm on the National Register of Historic Places.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Another tie-in and connection to the history of Mokena.
Oh, sure it is, yeah.
But one of, I think, the coolest pictures from your book, is taken right in front of here with Ozias McGovney.
Yeah,
and so let's hear about the home of the first mayor of Mokena.
So yeah, once again, another one that's easily one of the oldest in town. Has been added on to a couple times over the years, but here we have another home that was built around a log cabin.
And if you were to guess where the log cabin portion was,
good
do you think it'd be the smaller, shorter portion? Sure.
That would be my guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Without actually cutting into the walls and stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, this was originally a log, or built around a log cabin. One of 3 houses still standing in Mokena that have that distinction. But this house was in the hands of the McGovney family from day one, all the way up until right around World War I or so. So this was the McGovney's property for about 80 or so years. And this was the Ozias McGovney homestead, who of course we know was our first mayor, justice of the peace. He just wore lots and lots of hats in town. I'll plug our upcoming Marshall Cemetery tour. We're going to talk about him a lot up there, give you the full story on his life up there. But yeah, just another really historic, significant, meaningful structure in the history of town.
And talk about Midland Avenue here, because we just talked about this a little bit with an article that came up, but it was not referred to as Midland until somewhat recently, but tell us about that.
Yeah, so where Midland is right here, just the little street that leads north off of Front Street, for years and years and years, people called this street Niethammer Street, after the Niethammer family, who lived on the next corner on the, let's see, that would be the northeast corner of Front Street in Midland.
Move down a little bit.
Before the 1940s, Mokena's streets were never marked as such. So a lot of the time, they were just kind of referred to as, the street where such and such lives, or something like that. In fact, I once talked to a very interesting Mokenian who, once again, unfortunately is now deceased, but a lot of people will remember Helen Sipple. She was born in 1917 and lived in Mokena most, if not all, of her life. She told me that she never knew the streets in Mokena actually had real names until she was well into adulthood.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when do you think they officially referred to this as Midland?
I don't know, because the stretch of Midland that runs north from 3rd Street to Parker Street was the original section of the street that was called Midland.
Yeah.
And that appears on maps as far back as the early 1900s. And the story, I don't know if this is true or if this is just kind of like a legend, but the story I always heard was that at some point there got to be a postmaster who couldn't really spell the word Niethammer.
Okay.
So he just said, okay, we'll just call this whole street Midland. Because as you know, you get up to 3rd Street and the street kind of jogs over and then goes up. It's not just one single straight street.
Yeah.
But when that official designation happened, I'm not sure.
And it's interesting that this was created, it's like you said, it's on these really old plats.
Yeah, yeah.
That this was always created as a through street. And there are these kind of couple through streets down 1st Street and Front Street. I recognize that blue house right up there.
Right, yeah.
And
locked our house.
as we said, now the police station has moved on to the new updated station on 191st Street.
Sure, yeah.
But what has this property been in the past?
So this property has always been something municipal.
Okay.
And it's been added on to a few times, but this building was originally the Mokena Fire Station, back when Mokena only had one fire station, and it was built by the firemen, who were volunteer firemen at the time, in 1960.
Wow.
The original portion of the building is roughly, roughly from where the entrance is, going off to the east this way.
Wow.
So
Pretty small.
It was
huh?
much smaller, and then later on,
Well, knocked down a little bit.
they purposely left all this space up here so they could add on later if they needed to, which they ultimately did. I believe, I want to say it was maybe in the 70s when they built on the rest of this, but you can kind of see there used to be big bays or doors.
I was just noticing how different the stonework is, or the grout and the
sure.
stonework from that.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
in my mind, this will always be the fire station, because even when I was a kid growing up, it was still the fire station. And the police station, okay, this is about me, this isn't really history, but when I was growing up, the police station was in the city hall, and
Okay.
then when the fire station on Wolf Road was built, they moved out of here, and then the police moved in the 90s. And they were there all the way until this year when the new station opened up on 191st.
And I heard it was not great conditions in there.
Yeah, that's the story. I actually was really lucky. I got some behind the scenes tours of the police station.
Wow.
Because my best friend, now and growing up, his dad was the commander of the Mokena police, Chris Serdell. A lot of people know him. And sometimes, my friends and I would be walking around town with nothing to do, and we would just go visit him. And he would kind of take us around and show us, stuff they'd confiscated off of people, and show us the
Play
jail
with some
cell.
knives and some switchblades or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So that was always the fire station, and later the police station.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll probably have to do one more walk, but I want to come down and we'll take another good look at Mayor Ozias McGovney's house.
Yeah.
As we wrap up.
Really historic guy. He was mayor from 1880 to 1884.
Okay.
And it's actually kind of funny because his son, Ozias Irwin McGovney, was also mayor. That was a little later in the 1890s, but oftentimes, since they had the same name, they get confused for one another, and a lot of times people think that Ozias Sr. was mayor twice. He just served two different terms, but that's not the case. That was father and son.
Wow. And do you know how far apart it was?
It wasn't really that far apart, because Ozias Sr. was mayor from 1880 to about 1884, I want to say. And then Irwin McGovney, everybody just called his son Irwin to differentiate him from his dad, because that was his middle name. Irwin was mayor from like early 1890s. And then Ozias's grandson, Ona McGovney, was mayor for a period in the early 1900s.
That name really carried a lot of weight for quite a while in town, huh?
Yeah, it did, yeah. They were if we're not counting the Potawatomi, they were the very first Mokenians and were here before everybody else was, and just were very involved in Mokena affairs and in politics, in business, in the post office even. There was always some McGovney that was postmaster for a million years. So yeah,
Very cool.
Very interesting stuff.
Anything else you want to say about the house, or any other significant residents that lived here?
Yeah. There was, after the McGovneys moved out, Mr. and Mrs. Hirsch lived here. Julius, and I think Mrs. Hirsch's name was Anna, if I'm not mistaken. They lived here in the 20s.
Okay.
And this was after Mr. Hirsch retired from his farming. He and his brother Charles were big names in the dairy farming world of Mokena. They owned a huge farm on Wolf Road at 195th Street. Their sort of the homestead was where the apartment building is over there now. That was, yeah, Julius and Anna Hirsch came here to retire. And if I'm not mistaken, now that I think about it, I think Walter Fisher, who we know is our fallen police officer in the 1920s, I think his first call he ever got was to here.
Really?
I think, it was early 1920s, and some stranger, some weird guy kind of poked his head into the window of the house in the middle of the night and scared Mrs. Hirsch half to death.
Wow.
As is understandable. And somehow she got Deputy Fisher on the phone, and he came running to see what was going on. I think I remember writing about that in my book about him. So yeah, just a landmark that's been around for many, many years, many, many stories.
Yeah.
If those walls could talk. So.
Well, we've got a little ways to go. A lot of history on Front Street
it's
here.
Still a lot of history. Yeah. A lot of good stories to
Yeah,
come.
and some of our favorites, you know, the newspaper, right, was down the street.
Yeah,
and
that's right. Absolutely.
A lot of great things coming in that one. So hopefully we'll get back out and do that again soon. But thanks, Matt, for another great tour down Front Street.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for watching.